this, that going back to the Lisbon Treaty, the idea was that the member states' parliaments would have a partnership approach to European legislation with the institutions of the European Union centrally. And I don't want to overstate my case, but I will say this, that in all the time that I've been here, the sense that there is, that I am supposed to be aware of, or that any other members are supposed to be aware of what's happening in Europe, and that our views are being sought on such matters, or that there is, that we can signal disagreement to the European Parliament, that is entirely absent in this House. And I can only come to the conclusion, and it's a fair conclusion, that it has been considered by the Irish government establishment, and I'm not talking about the political complexion of it, that it is more convenient that all of this process is left alone for them to deal with behind closed doors, and the parliamentarians are excluded to the greatest possible extent from involvement in the European legislative process. The second point I want to make is this, that directives are directives. They are not regulations. And a directive gives member states very considerable latitude as to how they adapt the purposes and the requirements of the directive to their local situation. Do they criminalise certain things? Do they impose penalties? Do they have trial on indictment or district court summary proceedings for infractions? To the extent that the directive gives explicit discretions, how are those discretions to be exercised? Are we to be at the lower or the upper end of a scale? These are issues which are left to the member states' parliament. It doesn't produce, and they never were intended to produce, an absolutely uniform effect and text across the member states of the European Union. And it's in that context, and this is my third point, it's in that context that local parliaments, the parliaments of the member states of the European Union, they're not county councils. They are sovereign states, parliaments in the European Union, which is a union of sovereign states and which legislates on a shared basis between member states and the European institutions. It's in that context that I believe that Ireland has completely fallen down on the spirit of European law and fallen well behind the practice of many other countries in the European Union, whose parliaments do know what's happening in Brussels, whose parliaments are considering whether to signal disagreement or whatever at a European level. This one simply is not, this Parliament is not operating on that basis. Now, when it comes to directives, as you said, Okilik, very important directives come to us from Europe. And the list that you have mentioned probably came to me in part as a surprise, and probably would come to the great majority of members of the Oireachtas as a surprise. And the deadlines for action, probably until you mention them on the record of these houses, has not been publicly appreciated. And from that point of view, it is completely unacceptable, I think, that Ireland should just simply depend upon the effectiveness of government departments at some stage, whenever the dynamic is with them, to comply with their obligations under European law. Worse still are cases which you mentioned, Chairman, of the imposition of penalties on Ireland for non-transposition of directives. No explanation in these cases as to why there was non-transposition. Nobody carries the can. No minister says, sorry, I just cost us 5 million as a result of non-transposition of a directive because penalties were imposed on us. No public servant carries that obligation. And the Parliament here itself is almost unaware of it, unless PQs are put down to find out what the truth actually is. And so, what was negotiated in the last Shannon and in this Shannon was a procedure whereby there would be an early warning system, an air traffic control system to say, this is coming this directive is coming to us. It is or is not of significance. This committee is not going to decide the significance or the merits of any particular proposal, but it can say, here is something of major significance. Failure to transpose in a timely way may expose us to very significant penalties. And all we asked for, and let's put this on the record, all we asked for was to be sent statutory declarations in draft form so that we could look at them and alert the various sectoral committees as to what was should be coming their way, and most definitely, in our view, merited their consideration. That wasn't a complex process, but it was effectively opposed and sabotaged for years. And that's the sad fact. It was regarded as our terms of reference were set at naught. And we had, and let's put this on the record too, we had a most sterile debate with the government authorities, who claimed that every draft statutory instrument at the time, every draft statutory instrument, was the subject of discussion between the Attorney General's draftsman's office and the various departments, and that because there was legal advice built into that process of discussion, that the whole process was privileged and therefore could not be disclosed to anybody else, which meant that a draft statutory instrument which came into existence, or a proposal for a statutory instrument under the European Communities Act, could go through transformations of various kinds without anybody actually being aware of what was being discussed. And that you have to contrast with the legislative process here, where you come in with your bill and it goes through various stages, and the whole process is publicly understood. But I mean, if we end up in a situation, which we have ended up in, that the statutory instrument is kept under a veil, a legal veil, until such time as it's ready for the minister's pen to make it into law, we effectively wipe out public scrutiny, accountability and transparency. And now we are faced with a so-called compromise, Chairman, which somebody might say is better than nothing, but I doubt it very much, in which the first draft of a statutory instrument coming from the department to the Attorney General's office for consideration can be shown to us, but nothing else can be shown to us thereafter until the statutory instrument is ready for signature. And that's done on the basis, and this is what I really want to say most emphatically, and to say it as clearly as possible to the Attorney General's office in particular, that it's based on the proposition that there is legal professional privilege. In other words, it's the same as you going to a solicitor and asking for advice, and therefore the whole process has to be kept secret and cannot be made public. And I just want to say this: legal professional privilege at any level is waivable by the party in whom that privilege is vested. If I go to a solicitor and get advice on crime, civil law, or whatever else, there is legal professional privilege of a kind, which means that I am not obliged to disclose it. But if I choose to disclose it, if I choose to say, this is the advice I got from my solicitor, here is the letter setting out the advice I received, there is no problem. And what is wrong, and it's deeply wrong, and it's offensively wrong, in the thinking and the advice and the stance taken by the Attorney General's office, is that somehow, because their officials are talking to departments on matters of legal opinion or advice, that somehow are talking to departments on matters of legal opinion or advice, that somehow none of what transpires during that process or the changes that take place as a result of that process can be disclosed in the form. That's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is that the government at any stage can say, we've been advised by the Attorney General's office that, to impose this particular penalty or that particular procedure is better or worse or more or less compatible with constitutional principles or with European law, and that's why we're making the change. But this idea of masking the whole process of how statutory instruments are generated by saying that because somebody in the building on Merrion Street is talking to somebody in a department somewhere else in the city about the amendments to a draft statutory instrument, that the public cannot know what they are cooking up between them, is entirely wrong. And the result, Caoirleach, is this, that we are being told, you can see the first effort by the department. You can then see what the minister in the end signs, but you can't see anything of what happened in the meantime. And the same applies to every departmental committee which wants to discuss how Ireland will implement a directive. So, although showing us the first draft is a tiny step forward, it is in fact 10,000 steps backward, because it is putting in place a fundamental lie, and that is that the Irish state cannot share with its own parliament the legal reasoning why it is taking steps to have one approach rather than another to the implementation of a directive. And I just want to put on the record my wholehearted objection to this policy. It's wrong, the Attorney General's office is wrong, and the one thing is that this committee should challenge the Attorney General's office to state via minister, why can you not waive privilege in respect of these discussions so that the public and the Parliament knows why, in the end, a statutory instrument ends up in the shape that it's in. Thank you.
Thank you.